Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this story involves real people and real tragedies. We tell these stories not for entertainment, but to remember the victims and perhaps help others recognize the warning signs that could prevent similar tragedies. For the best experience, feel free to lower the volume a little, just enough to let the story gently carry you off to sleep. Alright, please get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's dive into tonight's first story. Tonight we're going to explore a story that unfolds slowly, carefully, like turning the pages of a book in the quiet hours of the night. This is the story of a woman whose light shone brightly, a story of obsession and tragedy that unfolded in the warm Texas evening of September 2, 2015. Let the details wash over you as we journey through this case together. Pleasant Plains, Illinois, is the kind of small town where everyone knows everyone. The roads wind through farmland, past white churches with tall steeples and homes where families have lived for generations. It was here, in this quiet corner of the Midwest, that Kendra K. Hatcher was born on February 3, 1980. Kendra grew up surrounded by love. Her mother, Bonnie Jameson, ran a quilt shop in town, her hands always working with fabric and thread, creating warmth for others. Kendra had 3 sisters and a brother, and together they formed a close-knit family grounded in faith and service. After her parents separated, her stepfather, Bruce Jameson, became an important presence in her life. From a young age, Kendra was drawn to helping others. She wasn't content to simply exist in the world. She wanted to make it better. In high school, she was captain of the cheerleading squad. Her energy infectious, her smile constant. She played volleyball, her teammates remembering how she encouraged everyone, how she made practice feel less like work and more like belonging. But it was her faith that truly defined her. Kendra didn't just attend church on Sundays. She led Bible studies for children from low-income families. She traveled abroad on mission trips, helping to build churches in communities that had little. During her dental school breaks, she would fly to Ecuador, spending her vacation time providing free dental care to children who had never seen a dentist before. One friend would later describe her with these words: "She was the most generous, giving friend. You could call her at 3 in the morning, and she would answer without any hesitation. Her laugh was contagious, high-pitched and full of joy." Kendra attended DePauw University in Indiana, where she majored in Spanish and minored in biochemistry. She joined the Kappa Alpha Theta sorority, making friendships that would last years. But she never lost sight of her goal: to help people, to serve, to make a difference. After graduating, she enrolled at the University of Kentucky College of Dentistry. The path wasn't easy. Dental school never is. Long hours, difficult exams, the weight of knowing that people's health would one day rest in your hands. But Kendra persevered, driven by something deeper than ambition. It was purpose. In 2010, after her marriage to her college sweetheart ended, Kendra made a fresh start. She moved to Dallas, Texas, a city of glass towers and endless highways, where the summer heat shimmers off the pavement and the nights pulse with energy. Dallas was different from Pleasant Plains, but Kendra adapted. She always did. She found work at a practice called Smile Zone. It was the perfect fit. Smile Zone provided high-end pediatric dentistry to children from disadvantaged backgrounds, giving them the care they deserved regardless of their family's ability to pay. Kendra had found her calling. Every day she walked into that office knowing she was changing young lives, one smile at a time. By 2015, at age 35, Kendra's life was blossoming. Her career was thriving. She had friends, community, purpose, but something was still missing. She wanted to share her life with someone. So like millions of others, she tried online dating. She downloaded an app called Tinder and began swiping through profiles, searching for connection in the digital age. Dr. Ricardo Paniagua, who went by Ricky, had also been looking for connection. Born in Northern California, He had attended Stanford Medical School before moving to Dallas in 2011 to complete his residency in dermatology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Ricky had been through a divorce. He understood the difficulty of starting over, of rebuilding a life after plans fell apart. He was working as an assistant professor at the university, his days filled with teaching and treating patients, helping them with everything from acne to skin cancer. When Kendra and Ricky matched on Tinder, something clicked immediately. Their first date led to a second, and then a third. They discovered their values aligned perfectly. Both were driven by their careers, but grounded in faith and service. Both wanted a family. Both were ready for something real. He would later say things progressed quite rapidly. Our values were matched. Our interests were really in sync right from the get-go. Within months, they were deeply in love. Their social media posts showed a couple radiating happiness. They talked about starting a wedding fund. They made plans for the future, the kind of plans that felt certain, inevitable. In early September 2015, they booked a romantic getaway to Cancun, Mexico. A long weekend on the beach, away from work and routine. It was scheduled to depart on September 3. They were both excited, counting down the days. Kendra flew to San Francisco to meet Ricky's parents. It was serious. This was the real thing. But there was something neither of them knew. Someone was watching them. Someone who had access to Ricky's emails, who could track his phone, who knew where he was at all times. Someone who was documenting every text message, every reservation, every photograph they posted together. Someone who was planning something terrible. To understand what happened, we need to go back 2 years, to when Ricky met someone else through that same dating app. Brenda Delgado grew up in Dallas. After graduating from Skyline High School, she worked as a dental assistant and took a second job whitening teeth at a day spa. She was a devout Christian, attending church regularly. Friends described her as someone who always wanted to make something of her life, someone who worked multiple jobs to achieve her goals. In August 2012, she matched with Ricky Piniagua on the dating app. They began dating, and the relationship quickly became serious. Nearly 3 years they spent together. They lived together. She had a key to his apartment. They shared phone accounts, passwords, access to each other's digital lives. During their relationship, Brenda became pregnant. After discussing it, she decided to have an abortion. It was a difficult time for both of them. The kind of experience that either brings a couple closer or reveals the cracks in their foundation. Cracks appeared. In February 2015, Ricky decided to end the relationship. He broke up with Brenda, but tried to maintain a friendship. He didn't want to hurt her. He hoped they could remain cordial, perhaps even stay in each other's lives as friends. Brenda said she understood. She agreed to the friendship. They continued to see each other occasionally, to text, to stay in touch. But beneath the surface, something was breaking inside her. She couldn't accept that it was over. She convinced herself that this was just a temporary setback, that Ricky would eventually realize his mistake and come back to her. In 2015, she enrolled in Sanford Brown University to become a dental hygienist, continuing her career in dentistry. But a few months later, she dropped out. Her focus had shifted entirely to Ricky. What he didn't know was that she still had access to everything. His email password, his iCloud account. She had installed an app on his phone that let her track his location in real time. She could see where he was at any moment. She could read his messages as they arrived. She had become a digital ghost in his life, invisible but always present. And then in June 2015, she saw it. An email from Ricky to a friend, mentioning that his new relationship was going very well. He had moved on. He had met someone named Kendra Hatcher. Brenda began taking screenshots. She documented everything. She found Kendra's social media profiles. She saw their photos together, smiling in love. She read their text messages. She knew about the trip to Cancun. She knew where Kendra worked. She knew where she lived. Friends would later testify about what happened next. Jennifer Escobar, Brenda's former roommate, told the court that Brenda was obsessed with Ricky. She would show Jennifer how she tracked his phone, how she read his emails. She was constantly checking, constantly watching, and then Brenda started talking about doing something about it. She told Jennifer she wanted to eliminate Kendra Hatcher, or even both of them. She offered Jennifer $2,000, drugs, and a car to put Ricky in a coma and kill Kendra. Jennifer, who was struggling with drug addiction at the time, didn't go to the police. She didn't think Brenda was serious, but Brenda was serious. She approached her cousin Moses Martinez. She asked him to scare Kendra with a baseball bat. When he testified later after initially trying to downplay it, he admitted that Brenda wanted him to actually hit Kendra with the bat. She even showed him the baseball bat she had purchased for this purpose. Moses refused. Brenda kept looking. She needed someone who would actually do it. Someone who needed money badly enough. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. Crystal Cortez was 23 years old. A single mother trying to make ends meet. She lived in what she herself described as a rundown neighborhood in Dallas. Life was hard. Money was always tight. She had a 6-year-old son to provide. She knew Brenda through mutual acquaintances. Brenda seemed successful, put together, someone who had her life figured out. Crystal looked up to her. One day in August 2015, Brenda came to Crystal with a proposition. She said she needed help with something. She was having problems with her ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend. She wanted to get rid of Kendra Hatcher. Crystal agreed to help. She would later testify that Brenda offered her $500 to act as a getaway driver. For a struggling single mother, $500 was significant, but they needed someone else. Someone who could actually pull the trigger. Brenda told Crystal to ask around in her neighborhood, to find someone who could take care of it. She promised drugs and money to whoever would do the job. They drove around together asking people if they would help, if they knew someone who could help. Brenda was methodical about it. If someone wasn't credible enough, they would move on to the next person. Eventually, they found him. Christopher Love was 31 years old, a small-time marijuana dealer with a criminal record. He had an outstanding warrant in Memphis, Tennessee. He drove a blue Chrysler Sebring that had seen better days. He needed money, and he wasn't afraid of breaking the law to get it. Brenda told him she had connections to Mexican drug cartels. She promised him around $3,000 in cash and drugs. For Love, who dealt in much smaller amounts. This was a fortune, he agreed. Over the course of several weeks in late August and early September, the three of them met multiple times. They discussed methods. Crystal testified they talked about injecting Kendra with heroin or a sedative. They considered using a baseball bat. They thought about kidnapping her, but Christopher said shooting would be easiest. Just get it done quickly. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. They needed to plan carefully. Crystal and Brenda began stalking Kendra. They bought binoculars and sat in a parking lot across from Kendra's dental office in Irving, watching her through the windows as she worked on her young patients, completely unaware that she was being observed. They used the Find My iPhone app to track Ricky's location, which told them where Kendra was. They learned her routines. They knew she lived at Gables Park 17, a luxury apartment building in uptown Dallas. It had a 24-hour concierge, a saltwater infinity pool, a fitness studio, a gourmet coffee bar. It was the kind of place where young professionals felt safe. The parking garage had security, but Crystal and Brenda figured out they could follow another resident's car into the secured area. They practiced the road. They timed it. Christopher obtained a gun, a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson handgun, the kind that makes a sound that echoes through concrete structures, unmistakable and final. They picked their date, September 2, 2015. The day before Kendra and Ricky were supposed to fly to Mexico. They wanted to strike before she left, before she could escape. September 2, 2015 was a Wednesday. The late summer heat still hung over Dallas, the temperature reaching into the high 80s even as evening approached. Kendra went to work as usual at Smile Zone. She saw her young patients cleaning teeth, filling cavities, making children laugh despite their nervousness. Her coworkers would later say she seemed happy that day. She talked about the trip to Mexico, about how excited she was to spend time with Ricky on the beach. That evening, Brenda created her alibi. She went to a Chili's restaurant with a friend named Jose Luis Ortiz. She ordered food, made sure to get a receipt, acted completely normal. Jose owned a black Jeep Cherokee, and Brenda had borrowed it earlier, telling him she needed it for errands. While Brenda sat in that restaurant, sipping her drink and chatting with Jose, Crystal and Christopher drove the borrowed Jeep to Gables Park 17. They arrived at 7:13 in the evening, according to security camera footage. The Jeep entered the unsecured visitor area of the parking garage and waited. Crystal was behind the wheel. Christopher was in the back seat, dressed all in black, the gun hidden on him. At 7:17, another resident arrived and used their keycard to open the gate to the secured area. Crystal followed the car through, a technique called piggybacking. They parked and waited. The garage was quiet. Concrete pillars cast long shadows. The air smelled like exhaust and motor oil. They sat there in the dimness, waiting for Kendra to come home. Meanwhile, at 7:42, Kendra pulled her white car into the garage's secured area. She had no idea anyone was waiting for her. She parked on the last row, gathering her purse and getting ready to head up to her apartment. Christopher Love immediately got out of the Jeep. He walked down the ramp toward Kendra's car, his footsteps echoing slightly on the concrete. Shimsad, another resident of the building, had just exited the elevator onto the lowest level of the parking garage. He heard something that would haunt him. Animal-like screaming. A woman's voice, desperate and terrified. Then he heard the words clearly. Help, help, help me. Then came the gunshots. Pop, pop, two sounds that shattered the evening. Hashem heard a car door slam shut and tires screech. He ran to his Corvette and got inside, watching as the black Jeep Cherokee sped down the ramp from the parking level above, made a left turn and passed behind his car. The Jeep turned around on the lower level and followed him up the ramp toward the garage's exit. As Hashem drove up that ramp, he saw her, a woman lying on the floor of the garage. She appeared to have been shot. He immediately called 911. Inside the Jeep, Crystal was panicking, backing out in the wrong direction, having to turn multiple times to find the exit. Christopher was in the passenger seat now, breathing hard. They finally made it out of the garage and sped away into the Dallas night. First responders arrived within minutes. They rushed to Kendra's side, but there was nothing they could do. She had been shot in the back of the head. The bullet entered from above and exited through her chin. The gunshot residue pattern suggested her hands had been up behind her head when she was shot, possibly as she begged for her life. She was 35 years old. She had been looking forward to a vacation with the man she loved. Instead, she died alone on the cold concrete floor of her parking garage. Near her body, investigators found bullet shards and a handgun magazine. Her tan Coach purse was missing. Her cell phone was left behind. At first glance, it looked like a robbery gone wrong. A tragic case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Detective Eric Barnes, who arrived at the scene, immediately sensed something was off. The manner of the shooting suggested an execution, not a panicked robbery. Someone had walked up to her, shot her in the back of the head, and taken her purse to make it look like theft. This was personal. The Dallas Police Department released still images from the security camera footage. To the media the very next day, the black Jeep Cherokee was clearly visible. So was the driver, a woman wearing a colorful striped shirt and black yoga pants. The images spread across local news. Someone would recognize that vehicle. 2 days later, Jose Luis Ortiz saw the footage on television and felt his stomach drop. That was his Jeep. He immediately contacted the police. He told them he had loaned the car to his friend Brenda Delgado on September 2. He had no idea it had been used in a murder. When he asked Brenda about it, she threatened him, saying he could be deported if he talked to police. She even offered to pay to have the Jeep painted a different color. Jose realized he needed to cooperate to clear his name. Detectives brought Brenda in for questioning on September 4, just 2 days after the murder. Detective Barnes sat across from her in the interrogation room. Brenda appeared calm, composed. She was wearing a black baseball cap and white tennis shoes. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. Barnes noticed she was wearing an I am second bracelet, the kind some Christians wear to indicate that Jesus comes first in their lives. Brenda mentioned her faith, crossing her legs and leaning forward earnestly as Barnes began asking questions. He told her he was investigating the murder of Kendra Hatcher. Brenda seemed confused, as if she had no idea what he was talking about. "How did my name come up?" she asked. Barnes questioned her for more than 2 hours. Brenda told him that her relationship with Ricky hadn't been that serious. She wasn't particularly upset when they broke up. She said she had never learned the name of his new girlfriend, and didn't know what she looked like. It was a convincing performance. She even produced a receipt from Chili's restaurant showing she had been having dinner with Jose at the time of the murder. She had an alibi. When asked about the Jeep, Brenda said she had loaned it to her friend Crystal Cortez that evening. The detectives brought Crystal in next. At first, she told a story about being carjacked. She said she had been with her 6-year-old son in the Jeep when an armed man forced her to drive to the garage, but the surveillance footage showed she had driven into the garage deliberately, following another car through the security gate. Her son wasn't visible in the footage. Confronted with the evidence, Crystal changed her story. She admitted her son hadn't been with her. She said a man she knew as Lamar had been in the car, and he had shot Kendra. She gave detectives his phone number. The name was faked, but the number was real. It led them to a Dallas address where a blue Chrysler Sebring was parked outside. The car belonged to Christopher Love. On September 30, 28 days after the murder, Love was arrested on his outstanding warrant from Memphis. Police searched his car, hidden deep within a side compartment. Found by a specially trained police dog named Titan was the murder weapon, the .40 caliber handgun used to kill Kendra Hatcher. Ballistics tests confirmed it. Christopher Love was charged with capital murder. Crystal was also charged with capital murder. Faced with the possibility of the death penalty, she eventually decided to cooperate. She told detectives the truth. Brenda Delgado had orchestrated everything. Detectives learned that Brenda had been stalking Ricky. They found evidence on her phone, screenshots of his text messages, photos of him with Kendra, maps showing his phone's location, saved pictures of the couple together. She had been obsessed, but before they could arrest Brenda, she disappeared. On September 5, she had been released after being questioned. She made bail on an unpaid traffic ticket, and then sometime in the following days she quietly left the country. Brenda fled to Mexico, where she also held citizenship. She went to Torreon, Coahuila, and stayed with family members there. On October 22, 2015, she was formally indicted for capital murder. A warrant was issued for her arrest, but Brenda Delgado was gone. For months, Brenda Delgado remained a fugitive. The case drew national attention. The murder-for-hire plot, the jealous ex-girlfriend, the innocent young dentist killed on the eve of a romantic vacation. It had all the elements that captivate the public imagination. In Dallas, Kendra's family mourned. Her mother Bonnie spoke at vigils, holding candles outside the parking garage where her daughter had died. Her co-workers at Smile Zone tried to make sense of the loss. How could someone so kind, so dedicated to helping others, become the target of such hatred? The investigation continued. Prosecutors built their case against Christopher Love and Crystal Cortez while they searched for Brenda. Then, on April 6, 2016, 7 months after Kendra's murder, the FBI took an extraordinary step. They added Brenda Delgado to their 10 most wanted fugitives list. She was only the 9th woman in history to appear on this list. She was fugitive number 506. A reward of $100,000 was offered for information leading to her capture. The FBI release described her as the suspected mastermind of a murder-for-hire plot, noting that her accomplices had been arrested and were in custody, but that Delgado had fled the country shortly after being questioned. 2 days later, on April 8, Mexican authorities located her in Torreon. She was arrested and taken into custody, but there was a complication. Mexico has strict rules about extradition when the death penalty is involved. The Mexican government would only agree to send Brenda back to the United States if prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty against her. The Dallas District Attorney's Office agreed to the condition. On April 14, 2016, Brenda Delgado was extradited to Dallas to face trial. The wheels of justice turned slowly. It would be years before all 3 defendants faced their final reckonings in court. Christopher Love's trial began in October 2018, 3 years after Kendra's murder. Crystal Cortez, who had accepted a plea deal, testified against him. She spent hours on the witness stand, describing in detail how they planned the murder, how they stalked Kendra, how they waited in that garage. She testified that they discussed multiple methods: injecting Kendra with a needle, shooting her directly, kidnapping her. She said Christopher had pushed for shooting, saying it would be the fastest and easiest method. She described how it was always meant to be a murder disguised as a robbery, not an actual robbery. She told the jury how she heard Kendra scream, "Help, help, help me," and then heard the gunshots. She described fleeing the scene, going to an abandoned house in Pleasant Grove, where they used disinfectant wipes to clean the Jeep, then returning the vehicle to Jose. The prosecution presented cell phone records that corroborated Crystal's account. They showed she and Love had been at Kendra's apartment earlier that day, tracking her movements. They showed searches on Love's phone after the murder for Dallas homicides and articles about Kendra's death, then about Crystal's arrest. The evidence was overwhelming. On October 31, 2018, the jury found Christopher Love guilty of capital murder. They sentenced him to death. He became the first Dallas County killer sent to death row since 2013. Crystal Cortez, as part of her plea agreement, received a 35-year sentence for the reduced charge of murder. She would be eligible for parole after serving half her sentence. She testified at Love's trial, and would testify again at Brenda's. Finally, in June 2019, nearly 4 years after Kendra's murder, Brenda Delgado stood trial. Lead prosecutor Kevin Brooks knew this would be challenging. Brenda had an alibi for the night of the murder. She hadn't pulled the trigger. She hadn't driven the Jeep. The case rested on proving she was the mastermind, the one who orchestrated everything. Crystal Cortez testified again, telling the jury that Brenda wanted to get rid of Kendra Hatcher because she was envious of her. She described how they used binoculars to spy on Kendra from across the street from her dental office. She testified about the planning meetings, the discussions of murder methods. Prosecutors showed the jury those binoculars. They showed Brenda's phone records, the screenshots of Ricky's messages, the photos of him with Kendra. They showed how she tracked his iPhone location, how she knew exactly where Kendra lived and worked. Jennifer Escobar testified about how Brenda was super obsessed with Ricky, how she had tried to recruit Jennifer to harm both Ricky and Kendra. Moses Martinez testified about the baseball bat, about how Brenda wanted him to hit Kendra with it. Jose Luis Ortiz testified about loaning Brenda his Jeep, about how she had threatened him and tried to have the vehicle repainted to hide the evidence. The defense attorney, George Milner, argued that Crystal Cortez was a liar trying to avoid death row by blaming Brenda. He questioned why Crystal had changed her story multiple times. He suggested that Crystal might have planned the robbery herself and implicated Brenda only after being caught. But the prosecution emphasized the sheer number of witnesses who corroborated the story. Multiple people testified that Brenda had tried to recruit them to harm Kendra or Ricky. The evidence of stalking was undeniable. The phone records, the screenshots, the tracking app, all of it pointed to someone who was obsessed and determined. Kevin Brooks in his closing argument said, "In a love triangle, those three individuals generally know each other. That beautiful soul, Kendra Hatcher. She didn't know this lady. The only person in a love triangle is Brenda Delgado, and it's a love triangle she created." On June 7, 2019, the jury began their deliberations. They needed less than 20 minutes. 18 minutes to be exact. They found Brenda Delgado guilty of capital murder. Because of the agreement with Mexico, she could not face the death penalty. Instead, she received an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole. After the verdict was read, the court moved immediately to victim impact statements. Kendra's mother, Bonnie Jameson, stood before Brenda Delgado and spoke through tears. "It's been 3.5 years of hell ever since," she said, her voice breaking. She looked directly at Brenda. "You, Brenda Delgado, have earned your spot here on this earth behind cold steel bars for the rest of your miserable, pathetic life. And if justice could have handed you a death sentence, make no mistake, I would have been there front and center." She continued, "You, Brenda Delgado, are the root of all evil. You and the other two people you took with you on your path of destruction. You could have never measured up to be the woman that my daughter Kendra Hatcher was." Kendra's sister also spoke, condemning Brenda for destroying not just one life, but countless others. The ripple effects of that September evening had spread far and wide. The family had lost a daughter and sister. Young patients had lost a dentist who cared about them. Friends had lost someone whose laughter filled rooms. Ricky Paniagua, who had to live with the knowledge that his ex-girlfriend had killed the woman he loved. That testified about the relationship. He described how things had progressed rapidly with Kendra, how their values matched, how they talked about marriage and children and growing old together. All of it destroyed because someone couldn't let go. As of today, Brenda Delgado is serving her life sentence in a Texas prison. She will never be released. Christopher Love remains on death row at the Alan B. Polinsky unit in Livingston, Texas. In April 2022, his appeal was denied by the United States Supreme Court. He claimed one of the jurors was racially biased, but the court found no merit in his argument. Crystal Cortez is incarcerated at the Christina Melton Crane unit in Gatesville, Texas. Her parole eligibility date is scheduled for March 2033. If released, she will have served 18 years for her role in ending Kendra Hatcher's life. The story of Kendra Hatcher is many things. It's a cautionary tale about obsession and the dangers of digital stalking. It's a reminder that the end of a relationship, no matter how painful, never justifies violence. It's a testament to the thoroughness of police work and the importance of security cameras in solving crimes. But more than anything, it's the story of a life cut short. A woman who spent her days making children smile, who traveled to Ecuador to help the poor, who led Bible studies and built churches, who was planning a future with someone she loved. Kendra Hatcher's coworkers said she had a smile always on her face. Her friends said she was the most generous, giving person they knew. Her family said she could have never been measured up to. On September 2, 2015, in a parking garage in Dallas, all of that light was extinguished. All because someone looked at love and saw possession. Someone confused attachment with ownership. Someone decided that if they couldn't have what they wanted, no one could. 3 lives are now spent in prison. Countless others are forever changed. And somewhere in Pleasant Plains, Illinois, a mother still mourns her daughter. If this is your first time listening to one of our true crime stories, welcome to Mr. Sleepy Crime, where we explore these cases in a calm and respectful way. I also want to take a moment to appreciate my amazing subscribers who've been rocking with me. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you're still awake and listening, don't forget to drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from and the current time in your corner of the world. Or just say something to let me know you're still here. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Now let's move on to our second story. Story 2. Tonight we're traveling to the mountains of northern Idaho, to a place where the water runs deep and cold, and where secrets lie beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect life. This is a story about love and betrayal, about the weight of lies that grow too heavy to carry, and about a morning boat ride that ended in tragedy. Let yourself relax as we unfold the story of Larry Isenberg. In the early 1950s, in the heartland of northern Idaho, a boy named Larry Isenberg was born into a world of timber and mountains. Idaho in those days was a place where families lived close to the land, where men worked in the mills and forests, and where hard work wasn't just a value but a way of life. Larry grew up surrounded by the scent of pine and the sound of sawmills, and from an early age he understood that nothing came easy. Larry was a bright student, the kind of boy who paid attention in class and dreamed of making something of himself. He went on to the University of Idaho, where he earned a degree in forestry. It was a perfect fit for a young man who loved the outdoors and understood the rhythm of the seasons. After graduation, Larry entered the lumber industry, starting from the bottom and working his way up through sheer determination. He spent 36 years in that world, beginning as a field forester and eventually moving into senior corporate management. His colleagues remembered him as someone who believed deeply in the dignity of hard work. "You work hard for what you want," he would often say. In 1974, Larry married his first wife. They built a life together and welcomed 2 children into the world, a daughter named Jessica and a son named Dean. By all accounts, Larry was a devoted father. He took his children fishing and hunting, taught them to appreciate the wilderness that surrounded them, and instilled in them the same values his parents had given him. Dean would later describe his father as not just a parent, but as his best friend. But marriages sometimes run their course, and by the late 1980s, Larry's first marriage was showing cracks. It was around 1988 when everything changed. Larry's company hired a new secretary, a woman named Lorcine Barnes, though everyone called her Lori. Lori had her own complicated history. She'd grown up in a sect of the Latter-day Saints Church, and her childhood had been marked by poverty. Her family sometimes squatted in empty farmhouses, moving from place to place. Despite these hardships, or perhaps because of them, Lori had developed a deep desire to help others. She'd married her high school sweetheart, Stephen Barnes, when she was just 19 years old, back in 1973. Together, they'd had 6 daughters. By the time she met Larry, Lori was raising those 6 girls largely on her own. The attraction between Larry and Lori was immediate and powerful. Here was a man who'd built success through determination, and here was a woman who'd survived hardship and still believed in helping others. They began an affair while both were still married. It's the kind of story that happens more often than people like to admit. Two people trapped in fading marriages, finding in each other something they thought they'd lost. By the early 2000s, both Larry and Lori had divorced their respective spouses. In 2004, they married. It was a blending of families. Larry's 2 children and Lori's 6 daughters, creating a new constellation of 8 children, and eventually 15 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild. The couple settled into a home they called Cougar Gulch, a secluded cabin nestled into the mountains about 20 minutes southwest of Inn. Inn itself is one of those places that seems almost too beautiful to be real. The lake that shares the town's name stretches for miles. Its water's a deep blue that reflects the sky and the surrounding mountains. In summer, boats dot the surface. In winter, the cold settles in deep and hard. Larry and Lori's home became known to their family as our paradise. They had a custom garden where they grew vegetables. Larry, now retired, spent his days tending to the property, managing the family's investments, and staying involved in various civic groups. He loved nothing more than having his children and grandchildren visit. He would embrace them with what his stepdaughter Amber would later describe as great big bear hugs, twistling their hair and telling them he loved them. Lori, meanwhile, had found her calling in nonprofit work. She became the executive director of the North Idaho Housing Coalition, an organization dedicated to renovating properties to sell or rent to low-income families. It was exactly the kind of work that suited her background and her desire to help others. She was so good at her job, so well regarded in the community, that she was once named Volunteer of the Year by the Inn Chamber of Commerce. To everyone who knew them, Larry and Lori seemed to have the perfect marriage. Dina Zenberg would later say that if you believed in soulmates, his father and Lori were soulmates. For all intents and purposes, Lori and Dad had an absolutely perfect marriage, he recalled. Lori's daughter, Chrislyn, remembered how Larry would look at her mother, with eyes of just admiration, constantly telling everyone how amazing she was. After 14 years of marriage, after nearly 30 years of knowing each other, they still seemed deeply, almost nauseatingly in love. But beneath the surface of this perfect life, something was terribly wrong. Lori was keeping a secret, and it was growing bigger every day. Money has a way of revealing who we really are. For Larry Eisenberg, money represented the fruits of honest labor. He'd worked for 36 years, saved carefully, invested wisely, and built a comfortable retirement. He believed in teaching his children and stepchildren to work for what they wanted, to earn their own way. He would offer advice, support, guidance, but he wasn't the type to simply hand out money. Lori's relationship with money was different. She loved her 6 daughters fiercely, and when they struggled financially, she wanted to help them in ways that Larry didn't always approve of. She wanted to have her own money, separate funds that she could use as she saw fit to support her children. And so, sometime around 3 years before Larry's death, Lori began to steal. The North Idaho Housing Coalition trusted her completely. As executive director, Lori had access to bank accounts and relatively little oversight. She knew how the system worked, understood the paperwork, knew exactly where the vulnerabilities were. What she did was both simple and sophisticated. She created fake companies, shell businesses that existed only on paper. She submitted bogus invoices from these phantom companies to the state and federal government. When the payments came through, she filtered the money into her own pockets. But Lori didn't stop there. She set up some of these fake accounts in the names of 4 of her daughters: Jessica, April, Amber, and Tracy. The daughters received some of the stolen money, and whether they fully understood what was happening or were manipulated into participating would become a matter of debate. What's clear is that Lori had pulled her own children into her crime. The amounts were staggering. The coalition would eventually estimate that Lori had embezzled around $1 million over 3 years. The official count settled on $579,495.75. But the true figure may never be known. For 3 years, Lori maintained this double life. By day, she was the respected executive director, helping families find affordable housing. By night, she was funneling stolen money to herself. and her daughters, and all the while she kept it hidden from Larry. He had no idea that the woman he loved, the woman he thought he knew completely, was living a lie. But lies, like water, have a way of finding the cracks. In late January of 2018, someone at the coalition noticed irregularities in the accounts. An internal audit was ordered. When Lori was confronted by the board, she tried to explain away the signatures on various checks, claiming she hadn't wanted to bother busy board members with minor issues. But her explanations didn't hold up. The evidence was too clear. On the morning of February 13th, 2018, the Coeur d'Alene Press was preparing to run a story. The headline would expose Lori's embezzlement to the entire community. A reporter left Lori a voicemail on February 12th, giving her a chance to comment. Lori never returned the call, but prosecutors would later prove that she heard that message. She knew her secret was about to become public. Larry Eisenberg still knew nothing. His wife hadn't told him she'd been fired from the coalition, hadn't told him about the investigation, hadn't told him that the life they'd built was about to come crashing down. That morning, as the sun began to rise over Lake Coeur d'Alene, Larry thought he was taking his wife on a romantic boat ride before breakfast. He had no idea he was sailing toward his death. February in northern Idaho is brutal. The cold settles into your bones. Lake Coeur d'Alene, which sparkles so beautifully in summer, becomes something else entirely in winter. The water temperature in mid-February hovers around 38 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, hypothermia sets in within minutes. Death follows quickly. Despite the cold, Larry Eisenberg woke up early on the morning of February 13th. He'd recently recovered from the flu, but he was feeling better and wanted to get out of the house. More than that, he wanted to do something special for Lori. Valentine's Day was approaching, and Larry was nothing if not romantic. He suggested they take a sunrise cruise on their boat, then head to the Coeur d'Alene resort for breakfast. At around 6:40 in the morning, Larry and Lori set out from Sunup Bay in their boat. The sunrise that morning was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Larry was so taken with it that he took a photo and sent it to his children. Dean received the picture and texted back, expressing surprise that his father and Lori would be out on the water in such cold weather. The temperature that morning was well below freezing. Most people would have stayed home. That photograph would later become crucial evidence, because investigators would prove that Larry didn't take it at all. Lori had taken the picture, then used a feature called AirDrop to transfer it to Larry's phone before sending it to his children. It was part of the story she was building, a false narrative of a romantic morning that had ended in tragedy. What happened next we can only piece together from evidence and testimony. Lori had brought a bottle of juice with her in her purse. Investigators would later find this bottle and discover that it likely contained diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in Benadryl. Lori also had a bottle of Benadryl tablets in Larry's truck. The drug in normal doses makes people drowsy. In large doses, it causes confusion, disorientation, and what doctors call brain fog. In massive doses, it's lethal. Larry drank from the juice bottle. Maybe Lori offered it to him, saying he needed to stay warm. Maybe she suggested it would help with lingering symptoms from his flu. We'll never know exactly how she convinced him, but sometime during that boat ride, Larry consumed a dose of diphenhydramine that was 70 times higher than what doctors recommend. His blood would later show over 7,000 nanograms of the drug per milliliter. A normal therapeutic dose would be between 100 and 1,000 nanograms. As the drug took effect, Larry would have started to feel strange. His coordination would have faltered. His thinking would have become foggy and confused. According to Lori's later testimony, Larry stood up to check the boat's trolling motor, which she claimed was making strange sounds. She said he looked back at her with a blank expression on his face, and then he fell into the frigid water of Lake Coeur d'Alene. But investigators would later determine that Larry couldn't have fallen from where Lori said he did. Experiments with the water currents and the boat's position proved that his body would have drifted differently if her story were true. The evidence suggested that Lori had steered the boat to a different location, put Larry's body in the water after he'd succumbed to the drug, and then moved the boat north until the motor died. Lori claims she tried to grab Larry as he fell, that she stumbled and hit her face on a door, causing a nosebleed. She said she searched frantically for him, but couldn't find him in the deep, cold water. Then she said she realized she'd left her cell phone in their truck back at the shore. She claimed she didn't know Larry's phone was still on the boat, hidden under some blankets. It took her 2 hours to find that phone and call 911. At 10:23 that morning, emergency dispatchers received a call from a woman in distress. "I'm on the lake, but I don't know where," Lori told them. She sounded frantic, terrified. Authorities used cell phone tower data to triangulate her location and found her at Powderhorn Bay. When deputies arrived, they found Lori alone in the boat, her face bloodied, her story tumbling out in a confused rush. The deputies had no reason to suspect foul play. They knew Lori. She was friends with members of local law enforcement. She was a respected member of the community. They saw a woman in shock, apparently the victim of a terrible accident. They launched an immediate search for Larry, but the water at Powderhorn Bay was over 130 feet deep. The cold was so intense that survival seemed impossible. That same morning, while search crews combed the lake, the Coeur d'Alene Press published its story. The headline revealed that Lori Eisenberg was no longer employed by the North Idaho Housing Coalition, and that the nonprofit was conducting an audit due to accounting irregularities. The secret Lori had tried so desperately to hide was now public knowledge. For 3 weeks, Larry Eisenberg was missing. Search crews continued to look for him. But Lake Coeur d'Alene is vast and deep, and bodies in cold water can stay submerged for a long time. Lori, meanwhile, was dealing with the fallout of her exposure. On February 26th, just 13 days after Larry disappeared, she was arrested on 1 count of grand theft and 40 counts of forgery. The evidence against her was overwhelming. She'd forged signatures, created shell companies, stolen more than $500,000. When confronted with the proof, Lori wrote a letter to her friends at the coalition. "As you know by now, Larry and I had an accident yesterday." The letter began. She begged for forgiveness and pledged to return the stolen funds. "I can pay all of it back as soon as I can sell my home," she promised. But Lori didn't wait around to face the consequences. She was released on a $75,000 bail, and then she disappeared. For 2 months, authorities couldn't find her. One of her phone numbers led investigators to a home in Seattle. Another led to her sister's house in California. But Lori wasn't at either location. It wasn't until July 25th, 2018, that she finally turned herself in. During those 2 months that Lori was on the run, Larry's body was found. On March 1st, a resident living on the shore of Lake Coeur d'Alene noticed something floating near the water's edge. When authorities arrived, they discovered it was Larry Eisenberg, floating face down in the frigid water. An autopsy was immediately ordered. And this is where Lori's story began to fall apart completely. The medical examiner found no water in Larry's lungs. None. If Larry had drowned after falling into the lake, his lungs would have been filled with water. Instead, the evidence suggested he was already dead or dying when he entered the water. What the medical examiner did find was shocking. Larry's system contained over 7,000 nanograms of diphenhydramine per milliliter of blood. The cause of death was listed as diphenhydramine toxicity. Larry Eisenberg hadn't drowned. He'd been poisoned. Investigators immediately looked back at Lori's statement. They remembered the bottle of Benadryl in Larry's truck. They remembered the bottle of juice in Lori's purse. They began to build a timeline, and the more they looked, the worse it got for Lori. A search of Lori's computer and Google search history revealed a chilling pattern. In the weeks leading up to Larry's death, she'd researched water currents in Lake Coeur d'Alene. She'd looked up information about drownings and boat accidents. The searches painted a picture of someone planning a murder, not someone who'd witnessed an accident. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. Investigators learned that Larry and Lori had taken a trip to Florida just weeks before his death. It was meant to be a vacation, a family trip to enjoy the warm weather. Lori's daughter, Chrislyn, had been there, watching her children play on the beach with their beloved grandparents. But while the family enjoyed the Florida sunshine, Lori had been on her computer. She'd researched water depths in Florida, currents and tides, drownings in Florida waters, boat rentals and boating accidents. It appeared that Florida had been a test run, a first attempt that had failed. Larry had become ill during that Florida trip. He'd emailed his doctor describing symptoms that sounded eerily familiar. "I had the shakes, terrible equilibrium, and even my brain was foggy," he wrote. These were classic symptoms of diphenhydramine toxicity. Investigators believed that Lori had tried to poison Larry in Florida. but the dose hadn't been enough or something had gone wrong. Larry had recovered, never suspecting that his own wife had tried to kill him. When they returned to Idaho, Lori apparently revised her plan. She'd learned from Florida. This time she would use a higher dose. This time she would make sure, and she would do it in the cold waters of Lake Coeur d'Alene, where a body could stay submerged for weeks, where hypothermia could be blamed for death even if the poison failed. Lori's arrest and the mounting evidence created shockwaves through the family. Larry's children, Dean and Jessica, were devastated not just by the loss of their father, but by the manner of his death. To know that someone you love died believing he was safe, trusting the person who was killing him, is a particular kind of agony. To know that my father and best friend is no longer alive because of other mistakes and lack of accountability has been a sickening black pit in my heart and soul. Dean would later say at Lori's sentencing, "Is a pain that I likely will never heal from." Jessica spoke of the hole in her soul that would never be filled. But perhaps even more complicated was the situation for Lori's own daughters. They'd grown up loving their mother, believing in her, trusting her. Some of them had been pulled into her embezzlement scheme, whether knowingly or unknowingly. 4 of them, Jessica Barnes, Amber Hosking, April Barnes, and Tracy Tesh, were convicted of conspiracy to commit federal program theft after receiving some of the stolen money. They were sentenced to probation, community service, and ordered to pay thousands in restitution. As the evidence mounted, Lori's daughters had to confront a terrible truth. Their mother had murdered the man who'd been a father figure to them for 14 years. Larry had been the one who gave them bear hugs, who played with their children, who had tried to guide them toward good lives, and their mother had poisoned him to hide her crimes. One of Lori's daughters, Chrislyn Woolston, remembered a conversation she'd had with her mother in April of 2018. Lori had met her in Seattle, convinced that the police were going to frame her for murder. She'd told Chrislyn she could no longer keep in contact with her children. At that point, Chrislyn still believed in her mother's innocence. "If you are telling the truth, I will fight for you," Chrislyn had said. Her mother's response haunts her still. Truth does not always win. A month later, Lori called Chrislyn from an unknown number. She was sorry, she said, but she had to leave. And for 2 months, the woman who'd once won Volunteer of the Year remained in hiding while bounty hunters pursued her. Amber Hosking, another of Lori's daughters, would later speak out against her mother. "I regret not saying more in the beginning. I regret not talking to the investigators. I regret not standing up for Larry," she said. Speaking for all her siblings, she was clear. "We do not support her. We do not stand by her." In November of 2018, Lori pleaded guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of theft from a federal program for her embezzlement. On April 30th, 2019, she was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, and ordered to pay restitution of $579,495.75, plus a $20,000 fine. But the murder case took longer to wind through the courts. In February of 2020, Lori was charged with first-degree murder through the use of poison. If convicted, she could face the death penalty. Her trial was scheduled for June of 2020, but the COVID-19 pandemic caused repeated postponements. For nearly a year, the case hung in limbo. Larry's family waited for justice. Lori's daughters grappled with their grief and anger, and Lori sat in prison, maintaining her innocence. Finally, in February of 2021, Lori's legal team and the prosecutors reached an agreement. Lori would enter what's called an Alford plea to the lesser charge of second-degree murder. An Alford plea is an unusual legal mechanism. It allows a defendant to maintain their innocence while acknowledging that the prosecution has enough evidence to secure a conviction. Essentially, it's a way of saying, "I didn't do it, but I know I'd be found guilty if this went to trial." On May 24th, 2021, Lori Isenberg appeared in court for sentencing. Members of both families were there, ready to speak. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, heavy with years of grief and betrayal. Before the family members spoke, Lori herself addressed the court. She spoke for more than 45 minutes, telling her version of events. She claimed that she'd been planning to commit suicide that morning on the lake. The Benadryl-laced drink, she insisted, had been for her, not for Larry. She'd brought it with her intending to drink it and drown herself, unable to face the exposure of her embezzlement and the shame it would bring. According to Lori's story, she'd fallen asleep on the boat, and Larry had found the poisoned drink while she slept. He'd drunk it by accident, not knowing it was laced with a lethal dose of medication. When he started to stumble and fall, she tried to save him but couldn't. It was all a terrible mistake, she claimed. She hadn't meant to kill him, but Judge Scott Wayman wasn't convinced. I have no doubt that the version of events you've relayed in court is the truth, at least the truth you've decided upon, he said. Your truth doesn't hold up in the light of all the evidence. The evidence told a different story. The computer searches before the Florida trip. The symptoms Larry reported, that matched diphenhydramine poisoning. The second round of searches about Lake Coeur d'Alene, the photographs she'd taken and sent from Larry's phone to create the illusion that he was alive and well. The experiments that proved Larry's body couldn't have entered the water where she claimed. The 2-hour delay before calling 911. The juice bottle in her purse. The Benadryl in the truck. All of it pointed to premeditation. All of it suggested a carefully planned murder, carried out to prevent Larry from discovering the extent of Lori's crimes and the lies she'd been living. Larry's daughter, Jessica McPherson, spoke of the hole in her soul. His son, Dean, described the black pit in his heart. Lori's own daughter, Amber, spoke of the family's loss, of 2 people that day. Larry, whom they'd loved, and the mother they'd thought they knew. Judge Wayman sentenced Lori Ensberg to life in prison with a minimum of 30 years before she could be eligible for parole. Given her age, she was 67 at the time of sentencing. She would be in her late 90s before she could even hope for release. For all practical purposes, it was a death sentence. As you drift towards sleep, consider the mysteries that still surround this case. The human mind, even in its darkest moments, remains something we struggle to fully understand. How does someone like Lori Ensberg, a woman once named Volunteer of the Year, become capable of murder? She'd grown up in poverty, overcome hardship, raised 6 daughters, devoted her career to helping low-income families find housing. By all accounts, she genuinely cared about the people she served. Yet somewhere along the way, she crossed a line from helper to thief, and then from thief to killer. The embezzlement itself raises questions. Why did she need the money? Larry was comfortable financially. They traveled, they entertained their grandchildren. They lived well, but Lori wanted her own money, separate funds that she could control. Perhaps it was about independence, about having resources she didn't have to account for. Or perhaps it was about maintaining a certain image with her daughters, being able to help them in ways Larry wouldn't approve of. Whatever the reason, the stealing spiraled. 100,000 became 200,000, became 500,000. The lies piled up, each one requiring another lie to cover it. And when she knew exposure was coming, when she heard that voicemail from the reporter, she made a choice that ended her husband's life. Did Larry suspect anything in those final moments? As the drug began to cloud his mind, as his coordination failed and the world started to blur, did he understand what was happening? Or did he simply think he was having a stroke? His body betraying him in ways bodies sometimes do. The thought that he died trusting Lori, never knowing she'd poisoned him, is somehow both merciful and heartbreaking. Lori's claim that she'd intended the poison for herself raises its own questions. It's certainly true that she faced the collapse of everything she'd built. Her career was over, her reputation destroyed, her freedom about to be taken away. Suicide in the face of such consequences isn't unthinkable, but the evidence against her suicide story is overwhelming. The computer searches, the failed attempt in Florida, the careful staging of the scene. These aren't the actions of someone planning their own death. Yet in her mind, has Lori convinced herself of this narrative? Does she believe, truly believe, that it was all a tragic accident? The human capacity for self-deception is profound. We can convince ourselves of almost anything if the alternative is too painful to bear. Lori Ensberg is currently incarcerated at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Pocatello, Idaho. She will become eligible for parole on February 22, 2050, when she'll be in her mid-90s. Given the severity of her crime and the lack of genuine remorse, it's unlikely she'll ever be released. Her daughters have scattered, trying to rebuild their lives away from the shadow of their mother's crimes. Chrislyn Woolston, now a married mother of 2, remains in Coeur d'Alene. Amber Hosking lives in Spokane Valley, Washington, also raising her family. The others have similarly tried to move forward. creating distance from a past that brought them nothing but pain. Some of them have children who will grow up never knowing their great-grandfather Larry, or knowing him only through stories and photographs. Those children will have to grapple with the knowledge that their grandmother murdered a man their parents loved. Larry's children, Dean and Jessica, continue to mourn their father. Time doesn't heal all wounds, especially wounds like these. The knowledge that their father's last moments were filled with confusion and betrayal, that he died at the hands of someone he loved and trusted, is something they'll carry for the rest of their lives. The North Idaho Housing Coalition has moved on, implementing new oversight procedures and audit systems. But the damage to its reputation took years to repair. Lori's crimes didn't just hurt her family, they hurt the very people she'd claimed to serve. Low-income families who depended on the coalition's work. Lake Coeur d'Alene continues to draw visitors, its beauty unmarred by the tragedy that occurred there. On cold February mornings, other boats sometimes venture out to watch the sunrise, their occupants wrapped in warm clothes, sharing coffee and conversation. They don't know that in Powderhorn Bay, on those deep, cold waters, a man once died because the person he trusted most valued her secrets more than his life. As you drift off to sleep, let this story remind you of the complexity of human nature. We are all capable of both great good and great harm. Lori Eisenberg helped families find homes, raised 6 children, and built a life that looked enviable from the outside. She was also capable of years of theft and, ultimately, murder. The line between who we are and who we could become is sometimes thinner than we'd like to believe. It's crossed not in one dramatic moment, but in a series of small choices, each one making the next easier. One forged signature leads to another. One lie requires another to cover it. And before we know it, we've wandered so far from who we thought we were that the way back is no longer visible. Larry Eisenberg lived a good life. He worked hard, loved his family, and tried to pass on his values to the next generation. His death was a tragedy, but his life was not a tragedy. He left behind children and grandchildren who remember him with love. He left behind a legacy of integrity and hard work. In the end, that's what endures. If you're still awake and listening, check whether you've left your little goodnight comment. I always check your comments before I sleep too. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Meanwhile, let's move on to our third story. Story 3. Tonight we're going to journey through a story that unfolded in the quiet suburbs of Connecticut, where manicured lawns meet tree-lined streets, and where behind the facade of perfection a tragedy was taking shape. This is a story about Jennifer Delos, a mother, a writer, a woman who loved her children more than anything in the world. On a crisp autumn morning in 1968, a baby girl was born in New York City. Her parents named her Jennifer Farber. She came into a world of privilege and opportunity. Her mother, Gloria Ortenberg, came from a family that had built an empire in fashion. Jennifer's maternal aunt and uncle had founded Liz Claiborne Incorporated, one of the most successful fashion companies in America. Her father, Hilliard Farber, was a banker and philanthropist, a man who understood the value of both money and giving back to the community. Jennifer grew up with an older sister, Melissa Irene, in the comfortable embrace of Manhattan's upper echelons. But despite her privileged background, Jennifer was drawn to the arts, to writing, to creating stories that mattered. She attended Brown University, that prestigious Ivy League school in Rhode Island, where the autumn leaves turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson. She graduated in 1990 with a degree that would open doors, but more importantly, with a mind full of stories she wanted to tell. She didn't stop there. Jennifer went on to earn a master's degree in writing from New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. She was serious about her craft, about understanding the architecture of story, the way words could build worlds and illuminate truth. And then she met him. Fotis Dulos was born on August 6, 1967, in Turkey, though he grew up in Athens, Greece, surrounded by ancient history and Mediterranean sun. He moved to the United States in 1986, following the American dream across the ocean. Like Jennifer, he attended Brown University, graduating just 1 year before her. In 1989, he was handsome, Ambitious, charming. He went on to earn an MBA in finance from Columbia Business School. He was building something, creating luxury homes, dreaming of an empire of his own. Their paths crossed in the way that paths often do when two ambitious young people move in similar circles. There was attraction. There was romance. There was the promise of building a life together. But first, Fotis had another chapter to close. In June of 2000, in Athens, he married a woman named Hilary Vanessa Aldama, also a Brown graduate. That marriage, though, was destined to be brief. And then came Jennifer. The details of how their relationship truly began remain somewhat private, but what we know is this. Jennifer and Fotis married, and together they began building what looked like a perfect life. They settled in Farmington, Connecticut, in a sprawling 10,000 square foot home on Jefferson Crossing. 6 bedrooms. The kind of house you see in magazines. The kind of house where you imagine happy families gathering for holidays, children running through hallways, laughter echoing off high ceilings. And the children came. 5 of them, stair-stepped in age, each one precious. By the time Jennifer disappeared, they ranged from 8 years old to 13. 5 beautiful children who knew nothing but love from their mother, who thought their world was secure. Fotis' business, the Four Group, built luxury homes for Connecticut's wealthy elite, million-dollar properties with every amenity you could imagine. On paper, everything looked golden, but beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Deep, irreparable cracks. Money troubles began to surface. The business wasn't as successful as it appeared. There were loans, there were debts, there were whispers of financial strain, and then there was something else. Something that would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed. The Fotis had met someone new. Her name was Michelle Troukanis. She was younger, she was from South America, she had worked as a reporter for ESPN. They met at a water skiing club in Miami, where the sun sparkles on the water, and everyone is tanned and smiling. Michelle had a 10-year-old daughter of her own, and soon she wasn't just someone Fotis knew. She was someone he was involved with, deeply involved with. Jennifer discovered the affair, and the discovery shattered whatever remained of their marriage. In June of 2017, Jennifer made a decision that would set into motion a chain of events no one could have predicted. She filed for divorce, but this wasn't going to be a simple separation. This was going to be a battle. Imagine for a moment the weight of a decision like that. You've built a life with someone. You have 5 children together. You've shared hopes and dreams, and disappointments, and now you're going to tear it all apart because the foundation has crumbled beneath your feet. Jennifer didn't just file for divorce. She did something else, something that spoke to her fears about what Fotis might do. In the middle of the night, while Fotis was away, she packed up her 5 children and moved them 70 miles away to New Canaan, Connecticut. She found a home to rent on Wells Lane, a quiet street in one of Connecticut's wealthiest and safest towns. The children enrolled at New Canaan Country School, where they made new friends, joined sports teams, took art classes. Jennifer was trying to build a new life for them, a safe life, away from the chaos that was brewing. The divorce proceedings began, and they were ugly from the start. Over the next 2 years, more than 400 filings would be entered into the court record. 400. Think about that. Most divorces, even contentious ones, might have a few dozen filings. This was a war fought on paper, with lawyers as the soldiers and the children caught in the crossfire. Jennifer sought full custody of the children. She told the judge that Fotis had threatened to take the children and disappear. She said she feared for her safety. She requested a restraining order, but the judge, apparently not trained in recognizing the patterns of domestic abuse and coercive control, denied the request. At the time, Connecticut law required proof of physical abuse for a restraining order, and Jennifer couldn't prove that. What she was experiencing, what experts would later recognize as intense psychological abuse, manipulation, and control tactics, wasn't enough under the law. The divorce was expensive, staggeringly expensive. A court-appointed guardian for the children had already been paid $175,000. A child psychiatrist who authored a custody report received $40,000. There were family therapists, 3 psychologists, and court-approved monitors who had to supervise Fotis' visits with the children. All of it cost money. Piles and piles of money that was draining away. And who was paying for much of this? Jennifer's mother, Gloria. Gloria Farber, in her 80s by now, was watching her daughter go through this nightmare. And she was doing what she could to help. She wasn't just paying for lawyers, she was also paying the mortgage and property taxes on the Farmington house. The very house where Fades was living with his girlfriend Michelle Trucanis and Michelle's daughter. Gloria did this because the mortgage was in her name as collateral. And if she didn't pay, the house would go into foreclosure. The irony was bitter and unmistakable. In court hearings, Fotis grew increasingly frustrated. His complaints were documented in transcripts. In March of 2019, during a 4-hour family court hearing, he complained about the limited time he was allowed with his children. "Your Honor, I am sorry, but why do I always get the raw end of the stick?" he said. "I really want to see my children. I have spent 2% of the time with them since January. I'm not Charles Manson." The comparison was startling. Charles Manson, a name synonymous with murder and manipulation. Why would anyone invoke that name unless they were trying to distance themselves from some dark perception? Unless they knew on some level that people were beginning to see them as dangerous. Jennifer had been granted sole physical custody of the children, though Fotis was allowed supervised visits. Every other weekend for 7 hours at a time he could see his children, but only with a court-appointed supervisor present. And there was another condition. Michelle Trucanis was not allowed to be around the children. The court had made it clear, no contact. This arrangement infuriated both Fotis and Michelle. The guardian ad litem who oversaw these visits later testified that Michelle was frustrated and disappointed. She didn't understand why the court wouldn't allow her to see the children. After all, they had known her. They had spent time with her before, but the court had its reasons. And those reasons were about to become tragically clear. Behind the scenes, Fotis was facing other pressures. His business was struggling. In the weeks before Jennifer disappeared, he received a wire transfer of $149,500 from a cash advance operation in Utah. These are high-interest financial products typically used by distressed businesses. It was a sign of desperation. There was also the matter of insurance checks. 3 checks from Chubb Insurance Group, totaling $193,610.50, made out to both Fotis and Jennifer Dulos. All 3 checks were deposited into a joint checking account, but Jennifer never signed them. And immediately after each deposit, the money was withdrawn and moved into Fotis' personal account. Some of it was then transferred into the Ford Group account. None of the insurance funds went to Jennifer. Investigators would later note this pattern. The money was flowing in one direction only, and it wasn't toward the woman whose name was on those checks. The custody battle raged on. There were emergency hearings. There was a court-appointed psychiatrist, Dr. Stephen Herman, who met with Fotis multiple times. But later the judge struck his testimony from the record and declared a mistrial in those proceedings. The judge ordered that Dr. Herman's report remain sealed. To this day, we don't know exactly what was in that report, but we can imagine it wasn't favorable to Fotis. Jennifer continued writing. She wrote for Patch.com, the local news site. She ran her own blog. She was trying to make a living, trying to support herself and her children. She had dreams too. She wanted to create a life-size dollhouse, something magical for her children. She had loved dollhouses as a little girl, that miniature world where everything could be controlled, where everything could be perfect. Real life, though, was far from perfect. Real life was court dates, and legal bills, and fear. Fear that gnawed at her. Fear that she expressed to her lawyers and to the judge. Fear that Fotis would do something. And on May 24th, 2019, that fear became reality. Friday, May 24th, 2019. The Friday before Memorial Day weekend. Schools would be closed on Monday. It was the kind of day when people start thinking about barbecues and beach trips and the unofficial start of summer. For Jennifer Dulos, it was just another morning in her routine. She woke up in her rented home on Wells Lane in New Canaan. She got her 5 children ready for school. Breakfast, backpacks, the usual chaos of a household with 5 kids. She was a devoted mother. Everyone who knew her said this. She would never ever disappear when she was responsible for the lives of 5 children. At around 8 o'clock that morning, Jennifer loaded her children into her black 2017 Chevrolet Suburban and drove them to New Canaan Country School. She pulled into the drop-off line, waited her turn, watched as each child climbed out and headed into school. Maybe she waved goodbye. Maybe she reminded them to have a good day. Maybe she told them she loved them. She had no idea it would be the last time she would ever see them. At 8:05 a.m., a neighbor's surveillance camera captured Jennifer's Suburban driving back toward her house on Wells Lane. She was alone in the car. She was heading home. What Jennifer didn't know was that someone was waiting for her. Someone who had been planning this moment. Someone who had taken an old red Toyota Tacoma pickup truck that didn't belong to him. A truck owned by one of his employees. A man named Paul Gumiani. The surveillance video tells the story in fragments, in pieces that investigators would later stitch together with painstaking care. At 6:36 that morning, gas station cameras on the Merritt Parkway in Fairfield captured the red Tacoma heading south. 27 minutes later, at 7:03, more cameras in New Canaan picked up the same truck, still heading south, getting closer. At 7:05, a school bus video showed an empty turnout on Lapham Road, not far from Waveney Park. But by 7:40, when the school bus passed by again, the red Tacoma was parked there. And at 7:57, when the bus made another pass, the truck was still there, sitting and waiting. The truck was parked within approximately 100 feet of where Jennifer's Suburban would later be found abandoned. Police believe the person driving that truck parked it there, then took out a bicycle that had been loaded in the truck bed. Surveillance video from a property on Weed Farm Road shows a figure in a dark hoodie riding a bicycle toward New Canaan at around 8 in the morning. The figure's face isn't visible, but the timing aligns. The route makes sense. Someone on that bicycle was heading toward Wells Lane, toward Jennifer's house. Someone was lying in wait. The phrase lying in wait appears in the police reports, in the legal documents, in the arrest warrants. It's a phrase that carries a particular weight in criminal law. It means premeditation. It means someone planned this. Someone waited with intent to harm. When Jennifer pulled into her garage at 8:05 that morning, she had no reason to believe anything was wrong. She was home. She was safe. Or so she thought. What happened next can only be pieced together from the evidence left behind. Police found blood in the garage. A significant amount of blood. Spatter patterns on the floor. And on a vehicle parked inside. The kind of blood evidence that indicates a violent attack, a serious physical assault. There were signs of attempts to clean up the scene. Paper towels were used. Lots of them. Jennifer's nanny would later notice that 10 rolls of paper towels were missing from the pantry. Investigators believe Jennifer was attacked in that garage. They believe she was bound with zip ties. They believe she was killed there in her own home, in what should have been her safe space. Her body was never found. But the blood evidence was enough to tell the story of what happened, enough to understand that Jennifer Farber-Deloff's mother of 5, daughter, sister, friend, writer, was murdered that morning in her garage, and the person who did it spent the next several hours trying to cover up the crime. After the attack, the killer had to move quickly. There was a body to dispose of. There was a crime scene to clean. There was a vehicle to move. Time was ticking. Surveillance cameras captured what happened next. Though the footage is grainy, the face is not always clear. But the timeline is there, documented in videos from 8 different sources. From gas stations and highways and school buses and residential security systems and even municipal bus cameras. At around 10:25 that morning, Jennifer's black Suburban was spotted on surveillance cameras. But Jennifer wasn't driving it. The vehicle appeared again later, driving back toward Waveney Park. Police believe the killer put Jennifer's body in her own SUV and drove it from Wells Lane to Waveney Park, where the red Tacoma was still parked and waiting. At 11:12 a.m., highway cameras on the Merritt Parkway captured the Tacoma heading north, back toward Farmington. In the bed of the truck, you could see what appeared to be a bicycle. Police believe Jennifer's body was now in that truck, and the killer was taking her away to dispose of her somewhere that she would never be found. The Suburban was left behind at Waveney Park. Abandoned. It would be found by police that evening, with blood evidence inside. But before that discovery, before anyone even knew Jennifer was missing, the killer had more work to do. According to Michelle Troconis, who was interviewed multiple times by police, she and Fotis Dillos had lunch together that afternoon. She said they ate together at their home on Jefferson Crossing in Farmington. Afterward, she said they went to one of Fotis's properties on Deerfield Road to clean it. There was a showing scheduled for the next day. She explained, They needed to get the property ready, but investigators didn't believe they were just cleaning a house. They believed they were bagging up evidence: bloody clothes, blood-soaked paper towels, cleaning supplies, zip ties, sponges, a mop handle. All of it went into garbage bags, black garbage bags that would soon be distributed across Hartford. Surveillance video from a neighbor's house across the street from the Farmington home showed something unusual that day: smoke rising from the chimney on a mild spring day in May, when no one would need a fire for warmth. There was smoke. Prosecutors believe Michelle Troconis was burning evidence in the fireplace that afternoon. And then, as the sun began to set, Fortis and Michelle got into his black Ford F-150 Raptor and drove to Hartford, about 30 minutes away. Hartford is Connecticut's capital city, but Albany Avenue, where they went, isn't the part of the city that tourists visit. It's an area that has struggled with poverty, with crime, with neglect, and it has a lot of public trash receptacles along the street. Surveillance cameras captured it all. Over a stretch of more than 4 miles at more than 30 different locations, a man matching Fotis Dillas's description was seen getting out of the Raptor and placing black garbage bags into trash cans. Over and over again. Stop. Get out. Throw something away. Get back in. Drive a little further. Stop again. Throw something else away. In one video, the man appeared to drop something into a storm drain grate near Garden Street. Police later searched that drain and found 2 Connecticut license plates that had been altered with adhesive and tape. The plates were connected to a canceled registration for a 2007 Chevrolet Suburban belonging to Fotis Dillas. Michelle Troconis stayed in the truck for most of these stops, or so she claimed. She said she was on her cell phone. She said she didn't know what was in the bags, but the police didn't believe her. Because when they went to Albany Avenue and started going through those trash cans, recovering those bags one by one, they found Jennifer Dillas's life scattered in pieces. A bloody Vineyard Vines t-shirt, the kind of casual, preppy shirt that was Jennifer's style. A blood-stained bra, bloody zip ties, kitchen sponges soaked with blood, clothing, towels, rags, a mop handle, all of it contaminated with blood that would later be confirmed as Jennifer's through DNA testing. They also found human hair, believed to be Jennifer's. This was evidence of murder. This was evidence of a desperate attempt to destroy proof of what had happened. Jennifer's children were supposed to meet their grandmother that afternoon. Gloria Farber was waiting for them at her apartment in New York City. Jennifer had a doctor's appointment, and then she was going to meet her mother and her children. But Jennifer never showed up, and she wasn't answering her phone. The children's nanny, Lauren Almeida, picked the children up from school and brought them to New York City as planned. But as the afternoon wore on and Jennifer still didn't appear, still didn't answer calls or texts, a terrible dread began to settle over everyone who knew her. Jennifer was never late. She never missed appointments. She never ever failed to communicate with her children. At around 7 o'clock that evening, Jennifer Dillas was officially reported missing. A silver alert was issued. Police began searching immediately. They checked her home on Wells Lane and found the blood in the garage. They found her Suburban at Waveney Park, 3 miles away. But there was no sign of Jennifer. The search expanded. Police brought in canines. They conducted aerial surveys of woods and ponds. They searched Waveney Park thoroughly, combing through every inch of the grounds. But Jennifer was gone. The next day, Saturday, May 25th, something strange happened. Fotis Dillas showed up at Gloria Farber's apartment building in New York City. He wanted to see his children. He seemed excited, according to Michael Meehan, the guardian ad litem for the children. Meehan later testified that Fotis called him and said, "Mike, have you heard the news?" When Meehan said no, Fotis told him Jennifer was missing, and Meehan noticed that Fotis's tone was excited. Excited. Not worried. Not panicked. Not desperate to help find his missing wife. Excited. And then on Tuesday, May 28th, just 4 days after Jennifer disappeared, Fotis Dillas' new divorce lawyer, Michael Rose, filed papers asking that Fotis be given full custody of the children. But think about that timeline. Jennifer disappears on Friday. Fotis shows up at Gloria's building on Sunday. Fotis files for full custody on Tuesday, maybe because he knew Jennifer was never coming back. On June 1st, 2019, 8 days after Jennifer disappeared, Police arrested Fotis Dulles and Michelle Troconis at a hotel in Avon, Connecticut. They were charged with tampering with evidence and hindering prosecution. At that time, there wasn't enough evidence to charge them with murder. Jennifer's body hadn't been found, but the evidence of the cover-up was overwhelming. The 5 Dulles children were moved to New York City to live with their grandmother, Gloria, who was granted temporary custody. They would never return to their mother's house on Wells Lane. They would never go back to their father's house on Jefferson Crossing. Their childhood as they knew it was over. Fotis hired an attorney named Norm Pattis to represent him. Pattis was a well-known criminal defense attorney in Connecticut, someone who liked high-profile cases and wasn't afraid of publicity. In an interview before he was hired by Fotis, Pattis had appeared convinced that Jennifer was dead, but once he became Fotis's lawyer, his tune changed. He maintained his client's innocence. He suggested that maybe Jennifer had staged her own disappearance, like the plot of Gone Girl. He said there was no body, no murder weapon, only a suspicious disappearance and a circumstantial case. Both Fotis and Michelle pleaded not guilty to the charges. In September of 2019, they were arrested again, this time on additional charges of tampering with evidence. Again, they pleaded not guilty. By late October, it was reported that Michelle and her 10-year-old daughter had moved out of Fotis's Farmington mansion. The relationship that had begun at a water skiing club in Miami, that had seemed so exciting and new, was fracturing under the weight of what had happened. Investigators continued to build their case. They interviewed Michelle Troconis multiple times. Each interview revealed more inconsistencies in her story. She couldn't account for Fotis's whereabouts on the morning of May 24th. From about 8 a.m. until sometime between 1 and 2 p.m., the exact window when Jennifer was killed. Michelle admitted she was with Fotis on Albany Avenue, throwing away bags. She said she saw him put something in a storm drain. She told police that Fotis had said to her, "Sometimes I hope she disappears," referring to Jennifer. In one particularly damning moment during her police interviews, when detectives told Michelle that Fotis had killed his wife and involved her in the cleanup, she responded, "That's like even worse. I hate him because of that. I was cleaning the house. I wasn't cleaning Jennifer." The distinction she was trying to make was clear. She wanted the police to believe that she had been cleaning a house for a showing, not helping dispose of evidence from a murder. But the police didn't buy it. 5 days after Jennifer disappeared, Fotis and Michelle were captured on surveillance video again. This time they were at a car wash and detail shop in Avon. Fotis was driving the red Tacoma, the same truck police believed he had used to transport Jennifer's body. Michelle was following behind in her SUV. They were having the truck detailed, thoroughly cleaned. The truck was later seized by police and processed for evidence. They found the truck had been meticulously cleaned. Even the license plates, the exterior, the truck bed, the tires, everything had been scrubbed. Inside there were seats in the truck bed that didn't belong to the Tacoma. Police believed these were the original front seats, which Fotis had told the truck's owner to swap out with seats from Fotis's Porsche Cayenne. One of those seats had a stain. A presumptive test at the scene came back positive for blood. The seat cover was cut out and sent to the state forensic lab. Investigators were also looking at another person in this case, Kent Mulwiney, an attorney and a friend of Fotis Dulles. Phone records showed that Fotis and Mulwiney had been in contact around the time of Jennifer's disappearance. Investigators believed Mulwiney might have helped prepare a grave for Jennifer's body at a hunting club where he was a member. They believed he might have helped provide Fotis with a false alibi. Then came January 7th, 2020, 8 months after Jennifer disappeared. Connecticut State Police arrested Fotis Dulles at his home in Farmington and charged him with capital murder and kidnapping in relation to Jennifer's disappearance and death. Michelle Troconis was also arrested that day, charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Kent Mulwiney was arrested as well, charged with conspiracy to commit murder. All three pleaded not guilty. Fotis's bond was set at $6 million. He posted it and was released the next day, but he had to wear a GPS monitor, and he was under strict conditions. No contact with certain people, no leaving the state. And then on January 28, 2020, there was an emergency bond hearing scheduled. Fotis was supposed to appear in court. He didn't show up. On that January day, when Fotis Dulles failed to appear in court, police were dispatched to his home in Farmington. They found him in the garage. In his vehicle, he was unresponsive. He had run a vacuum cleaner hose from the exhaust pipe of his SUV into the interior of the car. Carbon monoxide poisoning. It's a method that's been used before. A way of dying that's quiet, that just involves breathing and then not breathing. The carbon monoxide replacing the oxygen in your blood until your body simply shuts down. First responders did CPR. They managed to restore a faint pulse. Fotis was rushed to Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx, where he underwent hyperbaric oxygen therapy, a treatment that can sometimes reverse the effects of carbon monoxide poisoning by flooding the body with pure oxygen under pressure. His children came to see him at the hospital. His 5 children, who had already lost their mother, who were living with their grandmother, who were trying to make sense of a world that had become incomprehensible. They came to say goodbye to their father. On January 30th, 2020, 2 days after his suicide attempt, Fotis Doulos was taken off life support. He was pronounced dead. He left behind a note. In it, he maintained his innocence. He said he couldn't bear the thought of a trial, couldn't bear being falsely accused, couldn't bear the pain of being separated from his children. He said he was innocent of what he was charged with, but he never said where Jennifer's body was. He never gave the family closure. He never answered for what happened on May 24th, 2019. His death meant there would be no trial, no opportunity for prosecutors to present all their evidence in open court, no chance for a jury to decide his guilt or innocence. The case against Fotis Doulos died with him, but the cases against Michelle Troconis and Ken Mawhinney continued. Years passed. The COVID pandemic brought everything to a halt, including court proceedings. But eventually, in January of 2024, Michelle Troconis finally went on trial. The trial lasted for weeks. Prosecutors called 40 witnesses. They presented hours and hours of surveillance video, showing the movements of the red Tacoma, showing Fotis and Michelle on Albany Avenue, disposing of bags, showing the Tacoma at the car wash. They presented forensic evidence. The blood from Jennifer's garage, the DNA mixture on the faucet in the kitchen, a mixture of Jennifer's DNA and Fotis's DNA. The bloody items found in the trash on Albany Avenue, items that tested positive for Jennifer's blood. They showed the jury videos of Michelle's interviews with police, where her stories kept changing, where she couldn't account for Fotis's whereabouts during the crucial hours. They called the nanny, Lauren Almeida, who testified about that terrible day when Jennifer didn't come home, when she didn't answer her phone, when a sick feeling in her stomach told her something was horribly wrong. They called the guardian ad litem, Michael Medin, who testified about Fotis's excited tone when he called to say Jennifer was missing. They showed smoke rising from the chimney on a spring day. They showed the timeline minute by minute, camera by camera, building a picture of what happened on May 24th, 2019. Michelle's lawyer, John Schoenhorn, tried to defend her. He argued that Michelle didn't know what Fotis was planning. He said she was deceived, just like everyone else. He said she was a victim of Fotis's manipulation, but the jury didn't agree. On March 1st, 2024, after deliberating, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder. Tampering with physical evidence. Conspiracy to commit tampering with physical evidence. Hindering prosecution. Michelle Troconis, the woman who had met Fotis at a water skiing club, who had moved into his mansion, who had been there for those crucial hours on May 24th, was convicted of helping him murder his wife and cover up the crime. On May 31st, 2024, she was sentenced. The judge listened to emotional victim impact statements from Jennifer's children, now teenagers who had grown up without their mother. They spoke about the hole inside them that would never be filled. They spoke about missing their mother every single day. They spoke about how their lives had been shattered. The judge sentenced Michelle Troconis to 20 years in prison, with execution suspended after 14.5 years, plus 5 years of probation. Her lawyers said they would appeal. Michelle maintained her innocence, even after the verdict, but she was led away to prison, where she remains today. As for Ken Mawhinney, his case took a different turn. In June of 2025, prosecutors announced they didn't have sufficient evidence to prove the charge of conspiracy to commit murder. After an exhaustive investigation, they couldn't connect him to the murder plot in a way that would hold up in court. Mawhinney pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge of misleading police about his contacts with Fotis on the day of the murder. He was sentenced to 11 months in prison, which he had already served while awaiting trial. He lost his license to practice law. He maintains he doesn't know what happened to Jennifer or where her body is. Jennifer Doulos' body has never been found. Despite extensive searches across Connecticut, despite months and years of investigation, despite the best efforts of law enforcement and search teams and volunteers, Jennifer has never been recovered. In October of 2023, a probate judge formally declared Jennifer Doulos legally dead. It was a legal necessity, a way to allow her estate to be settled, to allow her children to access resources they needed, to move forward with certain legal matters. But for Jennifer's family, for her mother, Gloria, for her sister, Melissa, for her 5 children, the absence of a body means there's no true closure. There's no grave to visit. There's no place to lay flowers. There's only the terrible knowledge that somewhere in Connecticut, or perhaps beyond its borders, Jennifer's remains lie hidden. Every year on May 24th, Jennifer's family and friends release a statement. They speak of missing her every day in every way. They speak of the daily reminders of Jennifer, a shared reference, a musical riff, a delighted laugh, a graceful silhouette in the distance. They speak of how her strength of character, her intelligence, her tenacity live on in her children. They hold fast in their belief that Jennifer's body will be found. The investigation remains active. The Connecticut State Police continue to follow leads, to search, to hope that someday they'll bring Jennifer home. The 5 Doulos children are being raised by their grandmother, Gloria Farber, now in her late 80s. Lauren Almeida, the nanny who has been with them for years, continues to help care for them. They've grown into young adults now, the oldest in their 20s, the youngest approaching adulthood. They've had to navigate a world without their mother, without their father. They've had to deal with the media attention, with the scrutiny, with being known as the children at the center of a notorious murder case. They've had to process unimaginable trauma, the knowledge that their father killed their mother, the knowledge that they'll never see either parent again. But by all accounts, they're surviving. They're strong, like their mother was strong. They're intelligent, like their mother was intelligent. They're making their way in the world, carrying with them the love she gave them, even as they carry the weight of what was taken from them. Please, I'm just putting it out there. If you're still awake and listening, drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from, the time in your part of the world, or just say something to let me know you're still with me. And of course, if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next true crime story for sleep. Now, let's move on to our 4th story. Story 4. Tonight we're traveling to the quiet neighborhoods of Lehigh Acres, Florida, where beneath the warm southern sun and swaying palms, a tragedy unfolded in October of 2017. This is the story of Matthew Collins, a man trying to rebuild his life, and the night that changed everything. Matthew Eugene Collins was born in Williamstown, New Jersey. It was a small town where neighbors knew each other's names and children played in yards until the streetlights came on. Matthew grew up in what his family described as a loving home. He was close with his cousins, spending summers together, holidays around crowded tables. The kind of childhood painted in warm golden memories. But as Matthew grew older, the path became less clear. After high school, like many young men searching for something different, something more, he left New Jersey and headed south to Florida. The promise of sunshine, new opportunities, fresh starts. He found work in construction and landscaping, honest work, hard work under the Florida heat. But Florida brought other things too. The party scene, new friends who stayed out late, and eventually drugs. Matthew's struggle with addiction began quietly, the way these things often do. One choice leading to another until suddenly he found himself caught in a current too strong to fight alone. In 2014, Matthew's struggles led him to prison, burglary, trafficking in stolen property. According to investigators, he had fallen into home invasions to support his habit. He would tell stories, even brag sometimes, about the money he made. It sustained a lifestyle that was slowly destroying him. He spent nearly a year behind bars. By all accounts, it changed him. His family said he came out different. quieter, more thoughtful. He had seen something in that year, something that made him want to try again, to do better. When Matthew was released in 2016, he made a decision. He was going to rebuild. It was around this time that Matthew met Francesca. They connected through an online platform, the modern way people find each other now. Francesca was a 32-year-old medical professional, someone who had built a stable life for herself. And Matthew, fresh out of prison and determined to change, must have seemed like someone who deserved a chance. Their relationship moved quickly. Within months, they were serious. By early 2017, they decided to move in together, settling into a home in Lehigh Acres, a sprawling suburban community in Lee County. It's the kind of place where people go to start over, where houses are affordable and neighbors keep to themselves. A quiet place, a safe place. For a while, things seemed to be going well. Matthew was staying clean. He and Francesca were building something together. The future seemed possible again. And then came October 12th, 2017. It was early evening, around 5 o'clock. The sun was still up, casting long shadows across the streets of Lehigh Acres. Matthew told Francesca he needed a haircut. He borrowed her car, a red 2015 Chrysler 200. It was such an ordinary thing, going to get a haircut, the kind of errand you don't think twice about. Matthew drove to Fort Myers, about 30 to 40 minutes away. He headed to a barber shop on Palm Beach Boulevard. Later that evening, Francesca received a text message from Matthew. He said he was stuck in North Fort Myers. Nothing alarming, just letting her know he'd be a bit late, and then nothing. Hours passed. Francesca tried calling. No answer. She sent texts. Nothing came back. This wasn't like Matthew. Despite his past, he had been reliable, present. By the next morning, October 13th, 24 hours had gone by without a word. Something was wrong. Francesca called the Lee County Sheriff's Office and reported Matthew missing. The police immediately issued what's called a BOLO, a be-on-the-lookout alert for Francesca's red Chrysler 200. Somewhere out there, that car held answers. 5 days passed. 5 days of searching, of waiting, of hoping. And then on October 18th, deputies found the car. It was in Lehigh Acres, not far from where Matthew and Francesca lived. But something was immediately terribly wrong. The car was abandoned on a residential street. When investigators approached, they noticed the windshield. There was a bullet hole, a spider web of cracked glass surrounding it. They opened the door. Inside, blood. Large amounts of blood staining the seats. The dashboard. The electrical fuses had been removed from the car, making it inoperable. Someone had tried to disable it, to hide it. And the trunk, when they finally opened it, contained dirt. Soil. The kind that's been disturbed, dug up, moved around. Matthew Collins was nowhere to be found. But it was clear now. This was no longer a missing person case. This was something darker. Investigators began tracing Matthew's last movements. They pulled his phone records, looking for breadcrumbs. The data showed that on the night of October 12th, Matthew had visited a convenience store in Fort Myers. Surveillance footage captured him parking the Chrysler and exiting the vehicle. He wasn't alone. A man walked alongside him. Using cell phone tower data, detectives traced Matthew's phone to its last known location, a ping that led them to a residence in Lehigh Acres. The home belonged to a man named Nathan Ortiz. He was 20 years old, and he lived there with his girlfriend. Her name was Aria Armstead. She was 19. Aria's name might have seemed familiar to some people in South Florida. She had been a beauty pageant contestant, a bright girl with a big smile who competed throughout her teenage years. Friends remembered her as bubbly, energetic, the kind of person who lit up a room in the Little Miss Florida pageant. She had even been voted Miss Congeniality, but somewhere around age 16, things changed. Aria quit the pageant circuit. According to friends, she felt pressured by her mother to compete, to perform, to be perfect. The stress of it wore on their relationship. And around that same time, she met Nathan Ortiz. Nathan showered Aria with attention. He made her feel special, needed, but friends grew concerned. They said Nathan became controlling, that he convinced Arya to sneak out, told her she didn't need to talk to her mother, that she should focus only on him. Arya began drifting, not finishing high school, missing work. When she turned 18, she moved in with Nathan at his parents' home in Lehigh Acres. It was through Nathan that Arya met Matthew Collins. When detectives arrived at Nathan's parents' property, Nathan and Arya weren't home. They hadn't been seen in several days. But as investigators spoke with Nathan's parents on the front porch, something caught their eye. Freshly dug dirt on the side of the house. The ground had been disturbed recently. They obtained a search warrant. In the yard, they found a wheelbarrow, shovels, and clinging to them, soil that matched the dirt found in the trunk of Francesca's car. The pieces were coming together, slowly, inevitably. Then on October 28th, nearly 2 weeks after Matthew disappeared, Nathan Ortiz walked into the police station. Arya was with him. They had come voluntarily, Nathan's mother arranging the meeting, perhaps hoping to clear things up, to help her son. Detectives separated them. They spoke with Arya first, and almost immediately, without much prompting, she began to talk. Yes, she knew Matthew Collins. Yes, they had hung out on October 12th. In fact, the three of them, Matthew, Nathan, and Arya, had gone for a drive that night. According to Arya's account, they had been riding around when Matthew started using drugs. He became aggressive, she said. Erratic. Then Arya claimed he pulled out a gun and pointed it at her. Nathan tried to help, knocking the weapon out of Matthew's hand. The gun fell near Arya. She said she was pregnant at the time, terrified, acting on instinct. She reached for the gun and pulled the trigger. Matthew Collins died in the back seat of that car. What happened next, according to Arya, was panic. She and Nathan tried to hide what they'd done. They attempted to burn Matthew's body, but it didn't work. Finally, they buried him in a shallow grave in a wooded lot on Sally Avenue North, across the street from where they lived. Investigators followed Arya's directions and found Matthew's remains exactly where she said they would be. But as detectives dug deeper, Arya's story began to fall apart. Medical records revealed she wasn't pregnant. She had fabricated that detail, perhaps thinking it would make her seem more sympathetic, more justified in her fear. And there was something else. Matthew's family told investigators that he had a medical condition affecting his right hand. It limited his mobility, made it difficult for him to grip things properly. The idea that he could have pulled a gun and aimed it with precision, the way Arya described, seemed physically unlikely, maybe even impossible. The evidence painted a different picture. Cell phone records, GPS data, surveillance footage, all of it pointed to Arya as the one who pulled the trigger. Not in self-defense, but for reasons that remained murky. Some investigators believed the motive was robbery, that Arya and Nathan wanted Matthew's drugs. Others thought it might have been an argument that escalated too quickly, fueled by substances and poor judgment. Whatever the reason, Matthew Collins was dead, and two young people were about to face the consequences of that night. Arya Armstead was charged with second-degree murder and tampering with physical evidence. Nathan Ortiz was charged as an accessory after the fact, and with tampering with evidence. The quiet neighborhood on Sally Avenue, where residents like Gias and Zakabar had moved precisely because it was peaceful, was suddenly swarming with crime scene vans, investigators, and mobile command units. The Aubers told reporters they couldn't believe it. Everyone kept to themselves in Lehigh Acres. It was supposed to be a quiet area, and now, across the street from someone's home, a body had been buried, a life had been taken. Nathan Ortiz made the first move. He agreed to a plea deal. He would testify against Arya, if needed, and help investigators locate the murder weapon. In exchange, he received a sentence of 42 months in prison. He was released in October 2020. Since then, he has kept a low profile, fading back into the world, hopefully trying to rebuild what he helped destroy. Arya's path was longer. Initially charged with second-degree murder, she eventually pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. In August 2018, she was sentenced, 40 years in prison. Today, Arya Armstead is 27 years old. She is serving her sentence at the Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. Her projected release date is November 2036. She will be in her 40s when she walks free, having spent the entirety of her 20s and 30s behind bars. Matthew Collins' family was devastated. A cousin spoke to reporters, her voice heavy with grief. She said Matthew loved his family. They weren't perfect. No family is. But they were close. They kept in constant contact. Matthew had lived with her on and off over the years. They had history, love, and now he was gone. She expressed relief that justice had been served, that the people responsible were behind bars. But justice doesn't bring someone back. It doesn't fill the empty seat at the table, the missing voice on the phone. Matthew had been trying. After prison, after all his struggles, he had been genuinely trying to turn his life around. He had met Francesca, moved in with her, was building something new. And then on an ordinary Thursday evening in October, it all ended. A haircut that never happened, a drive that turned fatal, a shallow grave in the Florida woods. In Lehigh Acres today, life has returned to normal. The crime scene tape is gone. The investigators have moved on to other cases. Families still live on Sally Avenue North, their children playing in yards. The sun still rising and setting over the flat Florida landscape. But the memory remains. The neighbors who witnessed the investigation, who saw the mobile command units and the cadaver dogs. They remember. They remember the revelation that someone so young, someone who once wore tiaras and smiled for judges, could be capable of such violence. They remember that evil doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a sign. Sometimes it wears a pageant crown. And Francesca, Matthew's girlfriend, the woman who lent him her car that October evening, she remembers too. She remembers the last text, the hours of silence, the phone calls that went unanswered. She remembers the police coming to her door, the slow unfolding of the truth, the moment she realized Matthew was never coming home. Somewhere in her quiet moments, she probably thinks about the what-ifs. What if he hadn't needed a haircut that day? What if he'd gone to a different barber shop, closer to home? What if he'd never met Nathan and Arya at all? But life doesn't work on what-ifs. It works on what is. And what is this. Matthew Collins is gone. 2 lives are in prison. And a community learned that safety is an illusion, that tragedy can arrive on the quietest streets, in the most unexpected forms. As you lie here, drifting towards sleep, remember that stories like these, as dark as they are, remind us of something important. Life is fragile. The choices we make ripple outward, touching others in ways we can't always predict. Matthew Collins made mistakes. Yes, she struggled with addiction, broke the law, hurt people in his own way. But he was also trying. He was also human. And in the end, that's what makes these stories so haunting. Not the violence itself, but the humanity at the center of it. The fact that everyone involved, victim, the perpetrators, the families left behind, they're all just people, flawed, complicated, trying to navigate a world that doesn't come with instructions. Please, if you're still awake, let's move on to our last story. Story 5. Tonight we journey to a small township in Ohio, where ambition and love twisted into something darker than anyone could have imagined. This is a story of ordinary lives, interrupted by extraordinary choices. The kind of story that asks us to consider how thin the line between devotion and obsession truly is. Take a deep breath. Let yourself drift as we explore the case of Robert Fingerhut, a case that would reveal how carefully crafted plans can unravel, and how the truth has a way of emerging from even the most carefully hidden places. Our story begins in the fading light of December, in the year 2001. Robert Fingerhut was a businessman with modest dreams and steady ambitions. By 2001, at 57 years old, he had built something to be proud of. He owned and operated 2 Greyhound bus terminals, one in Warren, Ohio, and another in nearby Youngstown. These weren't glamorous enterprises, but they were honest work. The buses came and went, carrying travelers to distant cities, and Robert made sure everything ran smoothly. He was known around the community as a reliable man, punctual, hard-working, the kind of person who showed up every day, who took pride in turning both locations into successful operations. His employees respected him, his business associates trusted him, but Robert's personal life was complicated. In 1980, Robert met a woman named Donna Roberts. She was vibrant, ambitious, and they connected quickly. They married in 1983 in Florida, beginning what seemed like a promising partnership. Together, they bought a home in Miami. They dreamed together, planned together, but then something unusual happened. They divorced. Not because of anger or betrayal, as divorces often go, but for what they described as practical reasons. Financial protection, asset sheltering, in case the business ever faced lawsuits or failure. Donna would be protected. It was a strategic move, they said. A business decision, and yet they never truly separated. Despite the divorce papers, Robert and Donna continued living together. They moved from Florida to Richmond, Virginia, then back to Ohio in 1993. In 1994, they purchased a home on Fond du Lac Drive in Howland Township, Warren. Most people who knew them assumed they were married. Robert himself often referred to Donna as his wife in business dealings. The arrangement seemed to work. They managed the Greyhound terminals together. For a time, Donna even ran a small restaurant inside the Youngstown bus terminal called Just the Ticket. On the surface, their lives looked stable, comfortable, routine. But beneath that surface, cracks were forming. Robert had taken out 2 life insurance policies. Together, they totaled $550,000, and Donna Roberts was named as the sole beneficiary on both. Sometime before 2001, Donna Roberts began a relationship with a man named Nathaniel Jackson. Nate, as he was known, was younger, and he brought something into Donna's life that had perhaps been missing. Excitement, passion, intensity. Their relationship became sexual, became consuming. But there was a significant obstacle to their romance. Nate was arrested on an unrelated gun charge, and in early 2001 he was sent to the Lorain Correctional Institution to serve time. For many couples, incarceration would mark the end of a relationship, but for Donna and Nate, the separation seemed only to intensify what they felt. While Nate served his sentence, the two maintained contact through letters and phone calls, lots of them. Prison authorities, as is standard procedure, recorded many of their telephone conversations, and as the weeks and months passed, those recordings began to capture something disturbing. The conversations weren't just about love and longing. They were about Robert Fingerhut. Increasingly, they were about removing Robert from the picture entirely. In one letter, Nate wrote words that would later chill investigators. "Donna, I don't care what you say, but Robert has to go. And I'm not going to let you stop me this time." In another letter, more calculating and specific, Nate wrote, "Don't ever have to worry about excuse to him, because he will no longer be with us after 12/10/01. December 10th, 2001. A date circled in their correspondence. A deadline. The letters went back and forth. 143 letters from Nate to Donna, found later by police. 145 letters from Donna to Nate, discovered in a shopping bag. Nearly 300 letters in total, documenting their evolving plan in veiled language, in promises and reassurances. In recorded phone calls, the discussions grew more explicit. On November 24th, Nate tried to calm Donna's apparent nervousness. "Man, we gonna really talk when I come home," he said. In a conversation on November 8th, Nate outlined his intentions with disturbing clarity, describing what he wanted to happen to Robert, when Donna expressed reluctance to hear the details, saying she didn't want to know anything about it. Nate pressed on. "Just consider it a done deal," he told her. And Donna didn't report these conversations, didn't warn Robert. Instead, according to investigators, she began making preparations. She purchased a ski mask, a pair of gloves, items that would help someone move through a house unseen, identified. The date was approaching, December 9th, 2001. That was when Nate would be released from Lorain Correctional Institution. And when that day came, Donna Roberts was waiting in the parking lot to pick him up. 2 days passed after Nate's release. December 9th came and went. Then December 10th. And then, December 11th, 2001. It was a Tuesday, an ordinary winter day in Ohio. The kind where darkness falls early and the cold seeps into your bones. Robert Fingerhut worked that day at the Youngstown Greyhound Terminal. Around 4:30 in the afternoon, one of the Greyhound bus drivers, Jim McCoy, saw Robert at work. He was alone in the terminal that afternoon, managing things by himself as he often did. McCoy continued on his route, driving his bus to the Warren Terminal, and there he saw something interesting. Donna Roberts and Nate Jackson were together at the Warren Terminal. Jackson approached McCoy and said something that stuck in the driver's memory. "We're trying to get out of here." That evening, around 6:43, a server at a Red Lobster restaurant in Niles waited on a couple. She would later identify them as Donna Roberts and Nate Jackson. They had dinner together, paid their bill, left. Meanwhile, Robert finished his work at the Youngstown Terminal around 9 o'clock that evening. He told the security guard on duty that he was leaving early, heading home. Around 9:30, a neighbor noticed something odd. They saw Donna driving her car very slowly along Old State Route 82, near their homes. The car was crawling along despite the empty road, as if Donna was waiting, timing something. What happened next would only be pieced together later, through forensic evidence and blood spatter analysis. Robert arrived home at the house on Fond du Lac Drive. The house he shared with Donna, despite their divorce. The house that should have been his sanctuary. There were no signs of forced entry. Whoever killed Robert Fingerhut was let inside, or already had access. The attack appeared to begin in the garage. Evidence suggested Robert was beaten there first. Hit struggled. There were lacerations on his left hand, between his thumb and index finger, abrasions on his head, signs of a violent confrontation, and then the shooting. Robert was shot 3 times, once in the chest, once grazing his back, and then the fatal shot, a bullet that entered through his hand as he likely raised it defensively, then penetrated the top of his skull. The gunshot residue on his body indicated the killer had been close, very close. The weapon was a .38 caliber special or a .357 Magnum. Powerful, deadly at close range. Robert Fingerhut collapsed on the kitchen floor, near the garage door. His life ended there, in the home he'd worked so hard to maintain, surrounded by the possessions he had accumulated over 57 years of life. Nearby, police would later find a fully loaded .38 caliber revolver, but forensic testing would prove conclusively that this gun did not fire the bullets that killed Robert. It had been placed there, staged, perhaps to suggest suicide or to create confusion. At 12:01 a.m., just minutes after midnight on December 12th, Donna Roberts called 911. The responding officers found Donna Roberts in a state that seemed like grief. At times she was hysterical, crying out, "Oh, my Robert, my Robert." Her emotions fluctuated dramatically, calm and quiet one moment, screaming the next. But the detectives noticed something. When investigators were speaking extensively, discussing the case amongst themselves, the crying stopped. Donna would fall silent. But when someone entered the room where she was, when someone checked on her, the wailing would start again. One officer noted that when Donna appeared to be crying, he didn't see any actual tears. It was a small observation, but in cases like this, small observations matter. As Donna spoke with investigators in those initial hours, she painted a picture of her relationship with Robert. She described it as loving, devoted. She mentioned that Robert did his thing. She did hers, suggesting they had an open, modern arrangement. She even mentioned that Robert had a friend named Bobby, implying relationships outside their own. But she didn't mention Nate Jackson. Not at first. When asked directly about Jackson, Donna claimed she had forgotten about him entirely. Then, when pressed, she admitted she had picked him up from prison recently, and had last spoken to him on the morning of the murder. The investigators found this suspicious. You don't forget about someone you've been intimate with for 2 years. Someone you'd picked up from prison just days earlier. They obtained search warrants, and what they found in the house would unravel Donna's story completely. The letters, nearly 300 of them. A documentary record of planning, of veiled threats, of a countdown to violence. The phone records from the prison, showing hundreds of calls between Donna and Nate over months. The day after Robert's body was discovered, police found his car. It had been abandoned on a street in Youngstown, just 3 blocks from where Donna claimed she had dropped Nate off after picking him up from prison. Inside the car, Forensic specialist found blood on the driver's side visor, on the door handle, on the trunk release. DNA testing revealed something damning. The blood contained genetic material from both Nate Jackson and Robert Fingerhut. Mixed together, the probability that the DNA on the trunk release belonged to Jackson was 1 in 45 quintillion, 170 quadrillion for the Caucasian population. The evidence was overwhelming. 10 days after the murder, on December 21st, police arrested Nate Jackson at a friend's house in Youngstown. When they took him into custody, he had a bandage around his left index finger. They seized blood-stained gloves from the house, gloves with the left index finger missing. They found tennis shoes with blood on them. That same day, they arrested Donna Roberts at her home. Nate Jackson agreed to speak with police. He waived his rights to counsel and to remain silent. His story was one of self-defense. He claimed that he had arranged to meet Robert outside a Youngstown restaurant to discuss getting a job at the Greyhound terminal. According to Jackson's account, things had gone wrong. Robert had pointed a gun at him. They'd struggled. In the chaos, Jackson said he'd shot Robert to protect himself. But this version of events didn't match the physical evidence. The gunshot residue patterns, the staging of the revolver, the blood in the stolen car, the letters describing the plan weeks in advance. The self-defense doesn't begin with Robert has to go. Self-defense doesn't involve purchasing masks and gloves ahead of time. Self-defense doesn't leave 300 letters worth of premeditation. Both Donna Roberts and Nate Jackson were charged with aggravated murder. The prosecution pursued the death penalty against both defendants. They were tried separately but before the same judge, Judge John Stewart of the Trumbull County Common Pleas Court. The trials revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Prosecutors argued that Donna and Nate had plotted for months while he was incarcerated, that Donna had purchased the mask and gloves for Nate to use, that she had given him access to the house, that she had been driving slowly that night, timing her arrival, creating the alibi. The evidence showed that the original plan might have been even more elaborate. To handcuff Robert, force him into the trunk of his own car, drive him to a remote location and kill him there. But Robert had resisted, had fought back, and so the plan had changed, execution happening inside the house instead. The motive was clear: $550,000 in life insurance, freedom to be together without Robert in the way, a new life, financed by death. In 2002, Nate Jackson was convicted on all charges: aggravated murder, aggravated robbery, aggravated burglary. The jury recommended death, and Judge Stewart imposed the death sentence. In 2003, Donna Roberts faced her own trial. The evidence against her was equally damning. The letters, the phone calls, the purchases, her presence at the terminals with Jackson on the day of the murder, her failure to warn Robert, her staged emotional display after discovering the body. At her mitigation hearing, during the penalty phase of the trial, Donna chose not to present evidence in her favor except for an unsworn statement. She expressed sadness over Robert's death, but never accepted responsibility. She denied any scheme to kill him. Despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary, the jury convicted her of complicity in aggravated murder and conspiracy to commit murder. They recommended death, and Donna Roberts became the only woman on Ohio's death row. But in death penalty cases, the verdict is rarely the end of the story. The appeals process is long. It's exhaustive, full of legal challenges and procedural reviews. Both Jackson and Roberts appealed their convictions and sentences multiple times, through state courts, through the Ohio Supreme Court, and eventually into the federal system. In 2006, the Ohio Supreme Court affirmed Roberts' convictions, but vacated her death sentence. Not because she was innocent, but because of a procedural issue. Judge Stewart had enlisted the assistant county prosecutor, who tried the case to help draft the sentencing opinion. The court found this collaboration improper and ordered a resentencing. Judge Stewart resentenced Roberts to death in 2006. She appealed again. The Ohio Supreme Court vacated that sentence in May 2013, but then affirmed it again in April 2014. The legal back and forth continued. In 2017, an execution date was finally set for Donna Roberts, August 12, 2020, but that date came and went. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine had declared a moratorium on executions due to controversies over lethal injection procedures and difficulty obtaining appropriate drugs. Nate Jackson faced similar appeals. In 2021, a federal judge ruled that Jackson's constitutional rights had been violated during his 2012 resentencing, that he hadn't been allowed to present updated mitigation evidence about his background, his mental health, factors that might have convinced a jury to choose life imprisonment instead of death. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed, ordering yet another resentencing hearing for Jackson. The prosecutors fought back. Trumbull County Prosecutor Dennis Watkins called the federal ruling an undue interference with the state court's justice system. He described the case as the strongest death penalty case that I have personally tried, noting that over 700 exhibits have been presented at trial. In August 2024, the Sixth Circuit formally ordered Jackson's resentencing, ruling that his original sentencing had been blatantly unconstitutional due to the trial judge's improper comments and prejudicial actions. As of this recording, both Donna Roberts and Nate Jackson remain on Ohio's death row. Roberts at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville, Jackson at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution. Both now in their 70s and 50s respectively, they have spent more than 2 decades awaiting final resolution. 7 people from Trumbull County currently sit on Ohio's death row. 2 of them are connected to this single case, this single night, this single decision to choose murder over any other path. And so we reach the end of tonight's story, though the story itself hasn't truly ended. Somewhere in Ohio, in separate facilities, 2 people continue to wait. The appeals continue. The legal questions persist. The Robert Fingerhut story ended on December 11th, 2001. At 57, in his own home, killed by someone his former wife had brought into their lives. The Greyhound terminals he'd worked so hard to run, they eventually passed to others. The life he built erased in a moment of violence. 300 letters, months of planning, 550,000 reasons to kill. And in the end, all that planning couldn't erase the evidence, couldn't hide the truth. Sometimes in these stories, we look for lessons, something to take away. Perhaps it's this, that violence, no matter how carefully planned, leaves traces. Blood on a visor, DNA on a trunk release, words written in letters that seemed private but became public record. Or perhaps the lesson is simpler, that love and money, when twisted together with desperation and desire, can create something monstrous, something that destroys not just the intended victim, but everyone it touches. As you drift towards sleep tonight, let this story fade with the darkness. Let it remind you, perhaps, of the fragility of trust and the permanence of choice. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you're still awake, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.